Pardon the appearance of this video. I just was waiting in the car with my son to be picked up for school. But I figured I would comment on the large-scale prisoner exchange between the West and Russia yesterday. Let me start off by saying that I am absolutely not a supporter of the Democratic Party or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. But every now and again, even a blind squirrel finds a nut. In this case, I do think this is the singular event in the Joe Biden presidency that I can actually support that he has done. I think it was long overdue. I question the timing. Perhaps this may have been, an election stunt, but even if that's the case, it's a good thing that, people that were political prisoners, essentially hostages of the Russian government, have been freed. I believe his name is Andrei, but anyway, Soldatov, he's a Russian journalist and who specifically covers the security services and intelligence community. And his father, incidentally, is currently a political prisoner as well in Russia. He pointed out that the Russian opposition, one of the problems they've been experiencing is that basically all of their most capable leaders have been either in prison or they've been dead. There are still leaders in the Russian opposition, but they have been, they've lacked the ability to unify people, and they've lacked charisma, and they've lacked an overarching vision that anyone can get behind. So it's been basically just infighting and bickering for the past couple of years. Alexei Navalny was probably the most capable, the most charismatic, and the most unifying figure. He unfortunately has deceased. But Vladimir Kara-Murza was a man of similar quality, and in fact, perhaps even greater judgment. Alexei Navalny's smart voting program, when Navalny was alive, he advocated for voting for anybody that was running against the authorities, including the communists, including the Communist Party. Kara-Murza vehemently disagreed. He said he could never support the communists, never. And for that, I tip my hat to him. What did Kara-Murza get arrested for? Well, Kara-Murza was arrested for giving an interview on CNN. I can't remember the exact nature of it, but he was accused of giving false information about the Russian military, so they arrested him. Another leader, Ilya Yashin, young guy. Well, I think he's young. He's a few months older than me. But Yashin reposted an article about the civilian casualties of the Bucha massacre in Ukraine. For reposting this article, he was given a lengthy sentence, I believe 9 years and some change, assuming they didn't ever extend it, which they probably would. Yashin, my understanding is well, first let me say Yashin was actually a Russian politician. He had been a deputy of from Moscow, I believe. He had explicitly stated to his family that he did not wish to be traded. He did not wish to be involved in a prisoner swap. He did not want to leave Russia. He was a true patriot. He was a leftist. I can't sign on to everything he said and everything he believes, but he was a true patriot. He, as most of them are, really, he He didn't want to leave his country. He didn't want to be used as trading fodder. And he probably felt that if he was traded, he would be left powerless. He said that he believed, as a Russian politician, his place was in Russia, whether in prison or whether free. But he's been released, for better or for worse. I would say for better. It's unfortunate that he's no longer in Russia, but it's good that he's no longer rotting in prison either. Even from his jail cell, he continued to write little opinion pieces that he would pass on to his lawyer to publish. He kept on getting in trouble in prison, as Navalny and Karamazov did as well. He kept on getting in trouble for prison for proselytizing about freedom to his cellmates and anyone who would listen. And we had Oleg Orlov. Oleg Orlov is an elderly gentleman. He strikes me as a wise and kindly grandfather figure. He had been a Soviet dissident. He was, I believe, the president of the once powerful Memorial organization, which was the oldest human rights or civil liberties organization in Russia. It was so named because they started making memorials to victims of Stalinist repression back during the 80s. And they butted heads with the authorities every step of the way, essentially. Orlov was arrested because he published an opinion piece entitled in Russian, "They wanted fascism, and they got it." Essentially, if I may paraphrase and summarize the article, which I had read when it came out, he stated the obvious, which was that the Russian government invaded Ukraine on the pretense of fighting fascism. Meanwhile, the Russian government itself is becoming increasingly fascist. And as a counterpoint, what did the Russian government do? But they arrested him and gave him a lengthy prison sentence. I guess they showed him. Interestingly, Orlov is a man in his 70s, and in his trial, the court actually had the gall to ask him if he would prefer to, if he would be willing to go to war in lieu of prison. And he asked them, he says, "You aren't embarrassed to send an old man to war?" And they said no. And he says, "Well, may I respectfully decline your invitation? I'll just go to prison." Then those were probably the three most prominent. Those were definitely the three most prominent Russian oppositionists that were released. There was also Sasha Skochelenko. She's a young woman from St. Petersburg. She was an artist, a lesbian. She was one of the very first political prisoners since the start of the war. She was involved in a scheme by a bunch of artists in St. Petersburg. They would go to stores and they would replace the price labels or place stickers on items that looked like prices. They had barcodes and everything, but instead of saying this is 3,300 rubly, it would say 3,300 Russian soldiers died in the first week of the war. Or if they would say, instead of, I'm just making up numbers, 125 rubly, they'd say 125 Ukrainian civilians were found murdered in Bucha. She was observed by an elderly woman doing this, and she reported them to the police, and she was arrested. The elderly woman said she didn't really even intend for Skochelenko to get arrested, but she was, and she was given, I think, 9 years in prison for that. 9 years, can you imagine? At most, that'd be, in any normal situation, that would be just a fine or maybe a month in prison. But and she was I should mention also that both she and Karim Mirza were in very bad health. Karim Mirza, because he survived 2 separate poisoning incidents that the Russian security services had made against him before he was imprisoned. That left his body just a total train wreck. Skochelenka had not been poisoned, but she is a rather frail individual. She had, I believe, celiac disease, if I'm not mistaken, some type of digestion problems, as well as a cardiac issue. I don't remember what, but I'm glad, particularly both of them have been released, because they, and Orlov as well, I don't think would have survived prison. Wouldn't have survived very long at all. Additionally, there were a couple of people who had been high-ranking members of Alexei Navalny's committee against corruption, and they were arrested simply for being members of this organization, which the Russian government has deemed a terrorist and extremist organization. There's also 3 American citizens were released. There was Paul Whelan, a rather distinguished-looking gentleman, a Marine Corps veteran. He had been living in Russia working as a security officer at an auto parts manufacturer. He was arrested on charges of espionage. He is perhaps the murkiest figure. I don't know whether he was a spy or not. I have no way of knowing. The government has denied it, but of course, the government would deny it as well. And the Russian government didn't provide any evidence to the public, so maybe he was a spy, maybe he wasn't. Either way, I'm glad he's been released. I felt very bad for him. There was also Evan Gershevich, young guy. He had been at various times employed by the Moscow Times. I probably read some of his articles. I think he was working for the Wall Street Journal, if I'm not mistaken, when he got arrested. Journalist. He was also arrested on charges of espionage. And again, I'm not sure whether... I'm not sure there may be some legitimacy to that. Wall Street Journal, at any rate, denies it, as does the U.S. government. But again, they would, wouldn't they? Either way, again, I'm glad he's home. I'm glad he's free. It's unfortunate that it had to be this way, because he is half Russian himself, if I'm not mistaken. At least half Russian. At least one of his parents is a Russian immigrant to the U.S. And he had always loved Russia and wanted to. It was no accident he was a reporter there. That was what he wanted to do, and that's all he wanted to do. He had lived there for a number of years, apparently. And then there was a woman whose name escapes me, she was a dual citizen, Russian and U.S., who had worked for Radio Free Europe. She has also been returned. There are others as well. There are other Russian dissidents who I'm less familiar with, as well as a dual Russian-German citizen. A little guy, 19 years old. I'm not exactly sure what. I don't know much. I don't know anything about him. I know he was convicted of treason, I believe, in Russia, but I don't know the circumstances involving that. But at any rate, I'd rather a 19-year-old not serve lengthy sentences or life sentences for political crimes. I don't think he was convicted. I don't think his treason charges were real. He wasn't hurting anybody. He wasn't doing anything. violent or anything. And that was one of the outstanding features about all the people on the Russia that were traded from Russia. None of them had committed any acts of violence. They were all given these charges like terrorism and extremism and whatnot, but none of them had ever hurt anyone, as far as I'm aware, anyway. The people traded to Russia were basically all either hackers. There was one guy convicted of some kind of financial crime in the U.S., which I think was, again, related to hacking. I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, identity thief. There was mostly Russian agents. There were a number of FSB and GRU agents, a few SVR agents. The most high-profile person traded was actually from Germany. Vadim Kresnikov, I believe was his name. He was serving a life sentence in Germany for murder. He had been an assassin, I believe, in the employ of FSB, who had killed a Georgian national who had been a field commander of the Chechen separatists. He had also fought against Russian forces, I believe, during the Russia-Georgia War of 2008. The West calls him a murderer, but honestly, at least from the Russian perspective, he was a terrorist. I don't view that as any more murderous than assassinating any other terrorist anywhere in the world. And unlike, at least in that case, it was a pretty precision job that didn't involve any collateral damage. Unlike when Obama was sending drones all over the place, assassinating Al-Qaeda members in internet cafes. So, while he is a killer and he's probably not a nice guy, the person he killed, I think, was probably he had it coming. That's my opinion. But that's again, circling back to Andrei Soldatov and his interview on the matter. He has a very logical mind. He is specifically studied the intelligence services quite a bit in Russia, and he said that in this trade, it's interesting because normally in the past, both the Soviet and the Russian governments, when they tried to make trades, they always traded more people. They always tried to get more people from the West, in more Western prisoners back to Russia than they were willing to give Russian prisoners to the West. That math is wrong, is opposite this time. And the people, the actual individuals that were traded, were rather high profile and high value from the Russian side to the West. So he thinks the Russian side came out the losers on this. The Russian government came out the losers on this. They were, at least from their perspective, they would have, they gave a whole lot more than they received in return. Now, how does Russian propaganda portray it? Well, they basically say that we got rid of some of our unnecessary people and we got heroes in return. So they're portraying it as a win. Interestingly, Vladimir Putin gave presidential pardons to all the Russian prisoners sent to the West. So theoretically, they have no charges against them now, and they could return at any time. Some of them probably will. I would imagine Ilya Yashin, especially, may return. If they do return, they may well be met with extrajudicial problems, assassinations, beatings, who knows. and it would be very easy for the government to come up with new charges. And in fact, if they continue to speak as they did, if they continue to speak freely, then the government won't even have to trump up new charges. They will commit the same quote-unquote crimes that got them in prison in the first place. If you've watched this far, I appreciate you watching my lengthy ramble. These are just my thoughts. I'm pleased that it worked out this way. I was genuinely worried for their safety when all these high-profile Russian prisoners started going missing earlier this week. So I was afraid they would all wind up like poor old Alexei Navalny, but thankfully they'll live at least a little longer, and they're reunited with their families. So that's a good day, and finally Biden did something. Though I don't know how much credit we should give him. I don't want to give him any credit at all, but he at least was a part of it, and for that I can finally say he did something that I appreciate. But all thanks in reality to God. So have a good day. Bye.